So welcome everyone. We are back to session 2, talking about the blessings of obedience, but we're also, briefly discussing disobedience as well. So the blessings of obedience, but also what the impact of disobedience is upon your life.
Yes.
And also recognizing that there are times when God calls us to do things that we feel the burden of the call, and discussing how important it is to overcome the feeling of burdensome so that you're able to think positively and to be zealous in pursuing whatever that thing is that God has called you to do.
Yes.
So finishing up our segment on biblical characters that we can think of that come to mind that have been a blessing in some instances to nations because of their obedience to God, even when there was the feeling of the call being burdensome. And so, Melissa, I'll ask you to discuss firstly a male character that comes to mind when we are thinking and talking about the call being such a burden that the person found themselves being disobedient.
Absolutely.
Initially.
Absolutely. Initially, it's true because it's trifold. I
Yes.
mean, so one that comes to instance like to mind for me would be Jonah.
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent example.
Yes, and I think
Excellent.
it's because he got so overwhelmed. And I think, out of my perception, that initially it was selfishness because he didn't want to go to Nineveh, not because he didn't trust that God was going to do what he said he was going to do. There was no doubt of trust. It was because he didn't want God to be gracious and merciful to them. So initially, that's, I believe it's selfishness that prompted his disobedience.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, once he goes there and he sees, he repents.
Yes.
Yeah, so
Yes.
it's definitely trifold.
Yes. Great example. Great example.
Thank you.
And he's also a great biblical character to identify and to discuss because he's so familiar to even children who've heard biblical stories. Everybody knows about Jonah and the whale.
That's true.
So that's an excellent example because it touches upon everything that we're discussing and talking about. But it also identifies for us the level that God will pursue you
Absolutely.
to obey Him. And so that's not even a mean thing that God is doing. I think it's a loving Father, His action of pursuance, because it's almost like God is saying, I want to bless you so much that I am going to pursue you to do what I asked you to do, what I commanded you to do, what I called you to do, what I created you to do, so that I can bless you. And most people probably don't see that in Jonah's story, but God was able to bless him because he eventually obeyed.
And the interesting part about it too is that God could have got anybody. He'd have been like, okay, you don't want to do it?
Correct.
I'll get you somebody else.
Correct.
But he's like, no, in spite of you, you're going to do this.
Yes.
Because the blessing I have for you is too great.
Yes. And now that's a message for us.
Yeah.
Because God can choose anybody to do anything that we procrastinate in doing that He's told us to do.
Absolutely.
Or we rebel against Him and don't do what He told us to do. Or we don't even want to be disobedient, but we're afraid to step out and do it.
That's true.
And that is still disobedience. But it's not that you're being rebellious, it's you're afraid. There's a lack of faith to do it.
That's true.
And so now in all three of those instances, He could always choose somebody else, just like you said, Melissa.
True.
But He chooses to pursue you so that you will still be the one that does it, so that you're the person that can receive the blessing.
A lot of times too, I think the Lord is working on healing things that you didn't even know needed.
Right.
You know, because as it's easy for him to go and choose somebody else, but he loves us so much in that pursuance. He wants to heal, in Jonah's case, selfishness. I mean, so many different emotions, bitterness that was rousing up in him. He wanted to get rid of that, to cut that at the root.
Right.
And the only way to do it is to deal with it head on.
Right. Excellent, excellent. Okay, next character. And so we want to be fair because we have so many great biblical characters that are both men and women. And so this time I'll ask you, Melissa, to think about and give me the name of a female biblical character who received the blessing of obedience.
Okay.
And the blessing of obedience did not just impact her life, it impacted an entire nation.
Okay, well.
So there are several, because I could think of Deborah, but you think of someone that you think, and let's discuss her.
Okay, so the one that comes to mind for me is Esther.
Oh yes, oh yes. Now she did impact the nation. She did.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. And so there was a burden. Do you feel that with Esther, there was a burden
Absolutely.
when she had the conversation with her uncle?
So when she initially had the conversation with her uncle Mordecai, I believe that fear really just gripped her because she was afraid for her life, because back in those times, and she was married to the king, you couldn't come unannounced. You come unannounced and the penalty was death. And so you had to just rely on, you know, the favor of the king. And she was like, I don't know if he likes me that much, you know, if he's going to spare my life. So that was really big for her. And her uncle was like, do know that should you not do this, God will raise somebody else up to do it. He's like, you have been placed exactly strategically where you are for such a time as this. But if you don't do it, rest assured God will still get his way. So I think that's what really got her. I mean, she prayed about it, and then she realized, she's like, whether I perish or I live, it's got to get done. It has to get done. Have to be obedient. So yeah.
What a great example. What a great example. And she overcame the fear that the burden caused. And so that's important for us, because we have to recognize that God can call us to fulfill an assignment that causes us to feel fear. Because in our eyes, what he's asking us to do is so great that we just don't feel that we can do it. We may have feelings of inadequacy that are in addition to the fear. So now you're dealing with a fear that's fueled by your thoughts of inadequacy. And Esther's a great example of how to overcome that. And I think that it's great. Your discussing Esther is a blessing in so many ways for the listeners and the viewers, is because the other thing was she had a person of wisdom. You know, she was able to go to her uncle who spoke to her about the call, but he was also the one that gave her reality.
That's true.
So that now when she leaves, although there's fear, there's the reality of what an entire nation is depending on you to do. Whether they live or they have died is dependent upon if you will be obedient to this. And the beauty of it to me, and this is also a lesson for us, is that all Esther knew was that she, in the end, all Esther knew is that she had to be obedient, she had to do it.
That's true.
But what Esther did not know is that God would control the heart of the king.
Absolutely.
And so she was able, God touched the heart of the king, where the king had such great love for her that he was willing to do the thing that she requested for him to do. God strategically had her in the right place at the right time where there was not the call that she would lose her life.
That's true.
Because she obeyed the custom. So for us, for all of us, it should be encouraging that even when God calls us to do something, what he's called us to do, he's already worked it out. And we have to believe that God is perfect, because a perfect God would never send you to do something and set you up for failure.
That's true.
He has already assured your success in every step of that endeavor. So we have to trust him. And we have to be like Esther, where our faith in him and our commitment to obey him will overcome fear. And we have to learn from Jonah that we have to move selfishness out of the way to become the vessel that God has called us to be. Because listen, there's nothing that God will call you to do that's only about you. It's never only about you. It's always about someone else and you. So it could be about your family. It could be about co-workers. It could be about a nation. It could be about a country. It's never just about you. And Jonah shows us that, and Esther shows us that. So there are great blessings in obedience.
Amen.